Yume Nikki is a game that defined the early 2000s. It was the pioneer for the RPG Maker horror genre and left a lasting impression on many people, even to this day. But if you're watching this video, chances are that you already knew that. Yume Nikki has been well loved for many years. It went on to inspire the creation of .flow, Yume Nikki, even games like One Shot. But there's one game that would take inspiration from Yume Nikki that stood out. Actually, it would take inspiration from many Dream Diary games. This game would have been a love letter to Dream Diary fans, and one of the biggest collaborations in the community, crossing over many different games into one universe for the sake of duking it out. This game would be dubbed Project Dream vs. Dream. If you've been part of this channel for some time, you may notice that I already covered this game in a different video, so why am I doing it again? Unknown to most, there's actually a lot of lost content and history behind the game. None of it was documented, and no attempts to document the project have been made, presumably because access to information about the game's development had been long inaccessible. That's all going to change in today's video, where I'll be going over some of the lost history and content behind the game. Before we start, I need to make something clear. None of this information would be available to document without the amazing help from the developer of the game, Elijah. Elijah was awesome enough to give me access to a lot of information, like the forums for example, which had been inactive for quite some time, and a great source of information regarding the development of the game. This is just one example. She was willing to lend me a plethora of other stuff to make this video. Out of courtesy and personal request, I will be referring to her as her current identity, but again, this video would not have been possible without her, so huge special thanks to Elijah. While it's not entirely known, a generalized outline is that around the time the game began development, presumably 2011, a user by the name Yama made a post on the site Uboa-chan. Uboa-chan, to my understanding, is an image board similar to the website 4chan, the only difference being that this website was specifically made for the discussion of Yume Nikki related topics. And after all these years and all the Dream Diary games that released over the years, this website is still pretty active, which is pretty cool. According to Elijah, Yama was mostly a quote ideas guy, and she didn't fully realize that the game was incredibly underdeveloped. But she was determined to see it through, and thus began development of the very first build. There were a lot of staff working on this game, however it's unknown when exactly each member stepped in to help aid in the project's development. What I do know is that focus shifted from Uboa-chan over to the Dream vs. Dream forums and eventually over to Skype. One thing that Elijah did stress was that everyone was pretty young when creating this game, the oldest member being the user Night Margin in their early 20s, who you may recall did the sprite work for the game One Shot. In addition to the website and forums, a Tumblr was made to keep track of progression for the game, as well as being able to ask the staff questions about the game. The Tumblr itself is pretty cool. There's a handful of posts that go over the development of the game, as well as concept art, but it was mainly used as a Q&A in its beginning phase before becoming a blog of sorts. During its early development, a website was made to showcase the game, as well as upload the latest builds. Through this website, you can also access the forums, which were to discuss ideas for the game, report bugs, and other stuff that pertained to the game's development. During its earlier years, there was a lot planned for this game. There was going to be a total of 20 fighters and 40 stages. These fighters are separated in categories by game, so for Yume Nikki we have Maratsuki, Poniko, Monoko, Mono, and Masada. For Yume Nikki we have Urotsuki, Aoshiru, Tako Otoko, Gakuran, and Masuta. For .flow we have Sabitsuki, the Kaibutsu, Oriko, Smile and Sister, and the Cleaner. And finally, we have my favorite portion, the side characters, which include Florette from Answered Prayers, Chie from LCD Dem, and my personal favorite, the Gray Man from LSD Dream Emulator. Later down the road, however, the decision was made to remove Chie from the roster due to the original creator having some sort of breakdown asking fans to stop playing their game. There was also the main character Me, no, not me, this Me, which was confirmed later down the line, which we'll get into more later. The characters Follis and Usosuki from the game Yume Nikki were also going to be included. However, due to the creator explicitly saying they're not keen on their characters being featured in Dream vs. Dream, the decision was made to remove them, and I think what led the website to put TBD under the other category. There were apparently other considerations as well. A full moveset was made for the character Aori from the game.
N'oubliez jamais.
Yeah, that game. And the main character from an indie game called Instead Ghost Suburb was considered. However, these ideas never really went anywhere since there's little to no mention of them in the forums. However, it is funny to note that there was an unused sprite for the character Marisaki, which you can see resembles the character Aori. There were plenty of suggestions made by the community, as well as a poll made on Tumblr on who would replace Follis. The character Irene from the game The Looking Glass was supposedly the winning vote, however no moveset or sprite sheet was made for the character. There were also two other characters planned very early in development, the character Aya from Hallucinogena, and a character named Bale, which I can't seem to find any information on. If you know who this is, please let me know in the comments down below. There were apparently movesets made for both characters, but unfortunately they had been deleted from the Google Drive hosting the movesets. Of course, there was also the back and forth inside joke of whether or not to include the character Ebe from the game Ebe. The idea never really went anywhere, however in the 0.1 build of the game you can see a clear outline of her in the character select. It's also interesting to note that a character select and deselect sound for Ebe can be found in the files for what would eventually become the joke fighter Marisaki, however they do go unused. These sound effects and outline seem to imply that they were heavily considering it, but I guess never really went anywhere with the idea. Finally, from what I could gather, in the 0.1 build of the game, there were plans to have 5 fighters rather than the 2 we got. These were going to be Yume Nikki characters, however the team couldn't decide whether or not they should include QQ or Shitai. The decision to include them was ultimately shut down, and there's no mention of including them in the game anywhere else on the forums. However, interestingly enough, and we'll get into this more way later into the video, there seems to be a theme made for QQ. Now, I'm sure there are plenty of other characters that never went past concept art or moveset documents. For instance, the NPC Mafarako was most likely going to be a playable character, but never made it past 2 concept sprites. I'm sure there are other instances of this happening, but we'll leave it at that. As far as the stages, the list went untouched and no changes were made, meaning that most likely they were going to stick to this list from the beginning. Around late 2012 or early 2013, the original founder Yama had stepped down from the project, effectively disappearing without a trace. It was then decided that Elijah would take over the project since she had been doing a big portion of the work throughout the project's lifespan at this point. The final result was the 0.1 build for the game featuring Maratsuki and the joke character Marisaki. There were 2 other publicly accessible builds of the game, which we'll go over real quick before getting into the 0.1 build and everything prior. First and foremost, we have the April Fool's build, which was released on April 1st, 2012. There's not much to it, it's just a really crudely made version of Dream vs. Dream. It was made to trick people into thinking it was the playable 0.1 alpha demo. Last but not least, there was also another April Fool's build called Dream Heart's Dream. It's not a fighting game, but rather a visual novel. It's pretty short, but there are a good couple chuckles in there, as well as some decently made art. I do need to stress that this is without a doubt a product of its time, so there's a lot of dated stuff that may seem unfunny or old. The same goes for the previous April Fool's build. The earliest known documented version of Dream vs. Dream is the Alpha Preview 1 build that has been uploaded to YouTube. In it, the actual fighting mechanics have not been implemented. However, we do get to see a very early version of the title screen and stage select screen, as well as character portraits that went unused. One thing to note is that there's actually 10 character slots for each game rather than the 5 that we've already discussed. These could obviously be just placeholders, but it could also suggest that very early into development they were planning on having 10 characters for each game rather than 5. In Preview 2, the character selection is starting to take its final form, and a versus screen has been implemented. This versus screen would be used up until the alpha release. In Preview 3, fighting was introduced, albeit very early and very rough. Madosuke's sprite also looks different from the final product. The interface looks different as well, and hasn't been fully finished. In Previews 4 and 5 of the game, the final product is starting to come into play. A finalized character select had been implemented, as well as a finalized interface. And finally, this all leads to the public 0.1 build of the game. As fighting game standards go, Dream vs. Dream is very simplistic. By today's standards, yeah, you could argue it's not the best compared to other fighting games, but it could have worked. There was a lot planned for this game in terms of fighting. The game itself operates only on 3 buttons, but there were plans to add more mechanics to the game. One feature not implemented was the Dream progression system, which according to Yama was the heart of the gameplay for Dream vs. Dream. It was going to be based off of Yume Nikki's only gameplay mechanic of gathering, equipping, and using status effects. On the character select screen, you would have been given the choice of aggressive, defensive, and mobility. This was going to give characters a different set of moves per choice. During the match, a Dream progression bar slowly fills up when performing basic actions during a fight, as well as filling up on its own. It's definitely an interesting concept, and it looks as though the Dream progression bar did make its way into the game as well as concept art, however it went unused and doesn't seem to have any function. There was also a function called Dream Enders, which were a mixture of ultras from Street Fighter and instant kills from Guilty Gear. Anyhow, like previously stated, the gameplay for the 0.1 build as well as the 0.2 build are pretty simple. You have blocking, super moves, basic stuff for fighting games, and it works well. Only one character was made for the 0.1 build, so it gets a bit repetitive playing as the same character over and over again. Thankfully, the 0.2 build of the game, which had been released in 2014, added fan favorite Sabitsuki into the roster, adding a bit more variety into the game. It was probably decided at this point that previous ideas like the Dream progression system were a bit too ambitious. And with Yama leaving the forums, the ideas were most likely scrapped to try and make development of the game quicker. With that being said, unfortunately, the 0.2 build was the last build ever made for the game. There's a couple reasons why this was the case, which we'll go over later, but one main reason was because a new engine was being made from the ground up. According to a post on Tumblr, the characters Mi and Masuta were supposed to be in the original release, but apparently the engine was difficult to work with. This new engine would make development faster, easier, and improve the graphics. It was during this time as well that we saw sprites being made for the character Urotsuki. Progression seemed to be going along well, until the inevitable silence around 2015 to 2016. The project would no longer continue production, and as the years went by, a piece of history was seemingly gone from the internet. Here's the part I'm sure you're all dying for, the cut content. There is one thing that needs to be made clear. A lot of what you're about to see is mostly concept. Nothing was really set in stone for a lot of sprites and art, excluding Urotsuki. So whether or not these would have been included in the game at some point, we're not entirely sure. I'll be sure and try and point this out whenever possible, so just keep that in mind. Also, one last thing. If you've been watching the video up until this point, thank you. This video is a long time coming and I've put a lot of effort into it. With that being said, if you wouldn't mind commenting down below what you liked about this video, give it a like, maybe subscribe, it would help me out a lot. Why don't we start with our first fighter, Madatsuki. While not much has changed about her, an early sprite sheet can be found on the forums, resulting in a smaller moveset than what was seen in the final product. In the original concept, her diary appears blue instead of black. There's an unused set of sprites of what looks to be an idle animation of Marotsuki sleeping, and finally a set of sprites depicting Marotsuki with her eyes open. After the release of Sabitsuki, it was pretty clear that Urotsuki was next in line for the game. However, while she does have a lot of her sprite animations done, no code had ever been implemented for her. So it's not like we can just drop these into the engine and see how she would play. Here's a single piece of concept art for her sprite. Pretty good start, as this would evolve into the sprite we're more familiar with. Now for the stuff that was unreleased. Here are two crouch attacks, one where she performs a high kick, and the other having her spin around on her chainsaw. Here we have some basic attacks, one where she's stabbing with her chainsaw, one where she's kneeing somebody, and two that are wide swing attacks with her chainsaw. Here's an animation called Twin-Tailed Punch, which references one of the effects found in the game. This most likely looks to be some sort of heavy attack. One sprite that's weird is her equipping a pair of glasses. In the original game, the effect would have been used to reveal hidden items. We can actually get a good idea of what this move was supposed to be used for by looking at her moveset document. According to the document, the screen dims as Urotsuki uses her glasses effect and quickly adjusts them. As she does so, her chainsaw becomes imbued with red points of light and the enemy's hitboxes gain black points of light. If the red points cross with the black points, extra damage and a slicing animation will be played. It's basically just a special attack that reveals weak points in your opponent. What's interesting about these moveset documents is that there's actually stuff listed here that wasn't even animated to begin with. For instance, there's a move called Penguin Slide, but there's no such animation made for it yet. Urotsuki's moveset document also mentions her Dream Ender ability. Anyhow, back to the unused sprites. Here's her jumping sprite, which has her grow a pair of bat wings. And as far as standard states go, here we have her polygon effect used as a blocking animation, and in addition, here are 3 damage states called hit high, hit low, and hit mid. Here's a sprite of her falling down and wearing a cast. For movement, here we have a running animation as well as her crouching animation. And in addition to all these, here are a couple of unused sprites that were still in the basic animation phase. Here's one of her twirling her chainsaw around mid-air, with the description, 1% damage per hit, hits high, hits 5 times, 1 per twirl. There were some animations made for her jumping attacks, as well as what seems to be a super move. Finally, here's a winning animation. While digging through the forums, I had also found some of these animations with effects in place, so this is what they would have looked like if she had been implemented. Most of these were done by the user Shadow624, who had actually recently come into contact with me before the making this video to inform me about unused music for the game, which we'll get more on that later. And that's all we have for Urotsuki. As a final note, here are some concept palette swaps. 2 of my favorite happen to be one that is a palette swap of the character Reimu from the Toho franchise, and the other being a palette swap from the Wii game Mad World. Besides Urotsuki, did you note that there were actually 2 characters fully complete? Similarly to Urotsuki, code for these characters had never been implemented. But besides some art that needed to be done for the roster and whatever else, these 2 characters were practically complete. The 2 characters in question were Masuta from Yume Nikki and me. Alright, so to avoid any weird naming conventions, I'm going to be referring to them as ME, so deal with it. The character ME sprite sheet was actually made by the original developer of the game, and apparently at a rapid pace. There are a lot of sprites for each character, but some of my favorites include Matsuta showing you your outrageous tab, Matsuta's ducking animation, and ME pulling out a gun, because why not? One cool thing about ME's sprite sheet is that it effectively utilizes her different effects for different attacks. This is the case with the 2 playable characters, but not to the extent of ME. That's as far as we get for nearly completed characters, but there are still plenty of concept sprites that never went into production. Here is a single sprite of the character Chie. Here are a couple sprites of Masada, who was a planned fighter for the game. This sprite depicts the character Mono looking towards something while the wind is blowing against her. There's actually a neat GIF explaining how to properly animate wind blowing against her as well, most likely implying that there'd be similar sprites for her moveset. Tako Otoko from Yume Nikki has a single sprite made, as well as an unused animation for his idle state. Paniko from Yume Nikki had quite a few sprites made for her, but none really stuck out as something I'd see in the final product. There is one, but it's just a single sprite. There are two characters that had small animation concepts made for them. Ashiru from Yume Nikki had a concept animation of him falling down and taking a deep breath. It's very likely that these would have been used as both a winning animation and a losing animation. Smile from Dotflow had three concepts, one which seems to be an intro animation and two basic attacks. There's also a sprite of him flipping his hammer. Let's talk about my personal most anticipated character, the Gray Man from LSD Dream Emulator. Well, I'm sorry to say, not much was made for him. But there do exist three concept sprites of him. One which is him churning towards the fighter, a rough animation of how he was depicted to move, and a cleaned up version of his idle stance. The rest of the sprites are pretty much the same case. Here you have two sprites of Gakuran, one sprite of Oriko, which I quite like, two sprites of the Kaibutsu with one having animation, a single sprite for the character Florette, and one for Monaco. And yeah, that's pretty much it. But there's actually one more. The cleaner from Dotflow actually had some really nice sprites made for her, mainly for template usage. There does, however, exist one idle animation, and here it is, pretty much unfinished. I guess now would be a good time to explain why Dream vs. Dream died off. It was very ambitious for what it was trying to be. I mean, just looking at the moveset documents and some of the stuff that was planned for this game, it's pretty insane. Almost all of the members were actually still in high school during the development of the game, thus leading to development time being teeth-grindingly slow. According to Shadow, and to an extent Elijah, nothing was getting done. It also really didn't help that members would basically disappear for long periods of time, and in worst case scenarios, did not return. One of the main artists, Kippersnack, who did all of the character portraits for the game, disappeared from the forums. I couldn't actually find a reason as to why, but as you could imagine, this made development even more difficult. But the final nail in the coffin was the development of the game, One Shot. Once Elijah and Night Margin started development of the game, they were forever torn away from Dream vs. Dream, leaving it in the unfinished state that it's in right now. Though it may be unfinished, let's just be thankful for what we got, and what the creators were able to accomplish. As far as the events after Dream vs. Dream, not much really happened. But one notable thing that did happen was one of the main composers, Arcade Child, released some of the unused tracks for the game, which we'll go over now. There is a lot of unused music for this game, which thankfully had been somewhat recovered by the composers who were generous enough to share them online. The main composers for the game were Arcade Child, Plasterbrain, and Ragtime. Going through the forums and other means of research, we also found two additional composers. Hi guys, it's 3 AM. I'm tired. But the deeper I go down the Dream vs. Dream rabbit hole, the more stuff I find. On top of the 3 main composers that we just revealed, there's actually 5 additional composers that worked on this game. The 5 additional composers in question are Billy Chanter 33M, Kisa, Barizer, Apple Juice, and Indie Plastic. Now let's talk about Apple Juice. Can we please talk about Apple Juice? Please, viewers. I've been dying to talk about Apple Juice all day with you, okay? Apple Juice. His name keeps coming up over and over again. Apple Juice, Apple Juice, Apple Juice. I look in the folders, and this whole folder is Apple Juice. So I say to myself, I gotta find this guy. I gotta find his SoundCloud, and I gotta find his music. But there is no Apple Juice, guys. And Google searching Apple Juice really doesn't help. Okay, all jokes aside, Apple Juice, which was one of the main composers for this game, doesn't exist anymore. The farthest I got was finding out that they also went under the pseudonym Apple Ultrasound. But again, nothing online for them. Thankfully, going down the rabbit hole, I figured out who the other composers are, okay? So we're gonna start with Billy Chanter 33M, okay? A big fucking surprise, Billy Chanter 33M doesn't exist on the internet anymore, but I found out a couple things. Okay, so Billy Chanter changed from that to Uber Hadapon, right? And they started uploading some tracks from the Dream vs. Dream soundtrack. So I'm like, cool, he made these songs. No, he re-uploaded them, and they were made by somebody else. I think he uploaded like maybe one song that he made. So I'm like, fuck, okay, what did this guy make, right? So I Google searched the one song that he made, and surprise, he has a third alias, and it's called Patrol Limiter. But thankfully, this SoundCloud account seems to have all the stuff that Billy Chanter 33M, Uber Habiton, and Patrol Limiter made for the game. So the next one, which is Psycho TR2, wasn't as complicated. Of course, Psycho TR2 doesn't exist anymore, but a couple clicks and Google searches away, I find out that Psycho TR2 is actually Indie Plastic, and Indie Plastic managed to archive some of the stuff that he made for the game. Same case with Kisa. I mean, Google searching Kisa doesn't really fucking provide anything, but thankfully, she was following Billy Chanter 33M on SoundCloud, and we learned that she made a couple tracks for the game as well. Barizer, on the other hand, I'm surprised I actually managed to find this. So going through the musics folder, I find out that Barizer only made 2 tracks for this game, and I'm like, that doesn't seem right. And of course, Barizer doesn't exist anymore. Why am I not surprised? So of course, I googled the track that he made, no results, but I found out that Uber Hadapon, which is actually Billy Chanter 33M, re-uploaded his track onto their channel. And thankfully, scrolling down into the comments section, we find out that the Barizer that made this track is now known as F. It's just F. And to my understanding, they don't make music anymore, but it turns out that they only made these 2 tracks for the game, so that was accurate. Okay, now for the last one, Ragtime, okay? It was a little hard trying to decipher what the fuck happened, but I think I figured it out. I'm not 100% sure. I'm like 90% sure this is true. So listen, Ragtime is known as It's Ragtime on SoundCloud, and they have a bunch of Dream vs. Dream stuff uploaded to that account. Some of it that was used in the game, some other stuff that wasn't used in the game. Cool, awesome, but did you know that It's Ragtime is actually Plasterbrain? And how do I know this? Easy. On the Dream vs. Dream forums, Plasterbrain had been referred to as Ragtime. Out of everyone in this fucking music group, I love you guys, but there's like 2 people that didn't fucking rebrand. I am so sorry from straying away from the video, but I had to talk about this. It's just way too confusing, and I really didn't understand or think it would be this complicated writing the script initially. Alright, we're gonna go back to the video now. Thanks for tuning in with me. Here we go. To make a long story short, the soundtrack for Dream vs. Dream is pretty good. They take inspiration from the original Dream Diary games, and it sounds great. If you're interested in hearing more, I'll be linking SoundClouds in the description to available accounts that still have Dream vs. Dream music uploaded to them. The 2 primary artists for the stages were Saska TH and Jello Apocalypse. And yes, it is the same Jello Apocalypse with a large following on YouTube. And that's not the only person with a large following that participated in this project. Did you know that the YouTuber Nitrorad auditioned for the character Aoshiru, as well as Jello Apocalypse auditioning for Gakuran?
Hey, my name is James, aka Nitrorad, and I guess I'll be auditioning for Aoshiru.
I'm not gonna be treated like some weakling. Don't go easy on me just because I'm oh, sick. Hey, I actually...
Justice has been served. Case closed.
I can't prove it, but I know you're guilty. I guess I'm just not cut out for this.
Both of them did a pretty good job, but I'm getting way ahead of myself. Now, I did mention previously that the stages list went untouched, and thankfully out of the entire list, only 6 of them were not completed. In the game files for the 0.2 build, the full list of stages can be seen, and some stages marked with other underscore are unused in the final game. I'm not going to go too deep into this because these are publicly accessible, but they are split into chunks, so if I had to guess, here's my best attempt at recreating some of the unused stages. It's worth noting that you could theoretically rename the files in one stage folder with another stage folder, but the results most of the time didn't work. There is one more thing worth mentioning, and I suppose this could be considered an addition to unused stages. There are a ton of unused sprite effects. As previously mentioned, user Shadow624 handled all of the new sprite effects that were going to be implemented in the new engine. This did, however, go beyond stuff like hit sparks and general effects. Stages themselves were going to get a fresh coat of paint with the aid of sprite effects, making them look more unique and stylized. Shadow was kind enough to send 2 examples of what they would have looked like if they had been implemented, and he's a pretty cool dude. If you're interested in learning more, he seems to be somewhat active on his Tumblr with the same username. He's currently the director of the Flash fan game Super Smash Bros. Crusade and actively working on a new indie RPG. It's currently under the wraps, but if you're interested in any of that, be sure to check him out. Now, I know that's still not everything to the game. There's of course the moveset documents made for each character, and there's still a voice acting folder with different auditions for different characters. However, this video has gone on long enough. Let me wrap up this video with a couple of final notes. For those of you who want to check out the moveset documents, voice acting lines, and anything else mentioned in this video, I will be leaving a Google Drive link in the description with everything that I managed to preserve. My overall goal is to hopefully update the Yume Nikki fan games wiki with all of this information, but as of late I've been very busy. If anyone else would like to take up this task, you'd be doing the community a huge service by preserving this game's history. I also mentioned gaining access to the forums to gather information for this video, and I'm happy to say that I also made sure to back up and archive every single page on the forums. This task was very time-consuming, but thankfully I had the help from my good friend, Tony Dave. We both spent hours backing up as much as we could, and we're both happy to say that you can browse the forums like normal again. If you check the description, you'll find a link that leads to the Wayback Machine. Just keep in mind that the experience isn't perfect, it can be slow at times, some links and images are missing, and we decided not to archive the off-topic section. But if you wanted to browse the forums again, you can do so with the link found in the description. As a final note, to any new viewers or returning viewers, this video has taken me an incredibly long time to make. Please keep in mind that I work a full-time job that takes up a lot of my time, and I kept having to rewrite the script, re-record the audio, and at times I thought this video would never get done. I truly apologize for the very, very long wait between videos, and I hope to post more content in the future at a faster rate. If you liked this video and would like to see more, be sure to check out some of my other content, and be sure to be on the lookout for new videos. As well as that, I also stream regularly on Twitch, so if you want to see me play some games or ask any questions, be sure to check the description for the link. I also edit sometimes on stream, so you may see a glimpse of a new video. With all of that said, thank you all again so much for watching this video. Once more, if you enjoyed it, be sure to like the video, leave a comment down below, and subscribe. It would mean the absolute world to me, man. Really, it would. Tune into my next video. I got a couple ideas in mind. I don't know which one I'm going to tackle first, but I think whatever I decide to do next, if you like this video, you'll like the next one as well. I hope to see you on my next video, guys. Take care. Thanks again so much.